Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Zentropy Aviation's second video. Today I am going to take you through the process of starting and setting up a PMDG 737-700 for flight, for a sample flight, using information that comes from SimBrief. So we are going to go through the process of programming the FMC and the engine startup and preparing Autopilot for flight. This is going to be useful to those of you who are regular flyers of Prepared. This is Lockheed Martin's Prepared version 5.3. But since this aircraft is very imminently coming to Microsoft Flight Simulator, this tutorial will also be of use to Microsoft Flight Simulator users too, because the procedures are largely going to be the same, and they differ very much from the default Asobo Boeings, because those are not very detailed in terms of systems depth. So we're going to go through this. Before we get started on powering the aircraft up, I want to show you that we have ground services. We currently have ground power connected, as well as the wheel chocks that are set. So right now what we're going to do primarily is we're going to specify the amount of fuel we're going to utilize for the flight. Today we're flying from San Francisco to Chicago, so KSFO is where we are sitting right now, and according to SimBrief, for this flight we're going to need 12,203 kilograms of fuel, which you will see that is 58.4% fuel load of the aircraft. And as far as the payload itself, you could program it so that you specify individually how many kilograms of cargo you have and how many passengers you have, but I prefer to do it by zero fuel weight. And it's going to automatically calculate how many passengers and how much cargo you're going to have and distribute it accordingly. So for the zero fuel weight for this flight, SimBrief gave us a figure of 52.1. So we're going to go ahead and enter that into the zero fuel weight ZFW field here. And that results in an 85% load of the aircraft. Which is great. And now we are ready to get some stuff rolling. We're going to switch to the overhead view really quick, lower panel, and power this up. So before we activate ground power, we need to arm the emergency lights, which is great because it's going to illuminate the overhead panel anyway. Close the guard. The battery comes on. Close the guard. The ground power comes on here. The emergency lights go out, and now the aircraft is powered from the ground. First thing we want to do is get the IRS to align itself, because that process is going to take a few minutes. So we're going to put both of these switches into the nav position. As you see, the displays are going through a power-up procedure right now, so they're not going to have anything on them. Eventually, when they go through the self-testing, the displays will power up by themselves. In the meantime, we can do a couple of things on the overhead panel. Namely, we are going to enable window heat. These four switches here. You can turn on the probe heat as well. The concept of Boeing's is generally a dark cockpit, so when things are illuminated, that usually means something isn't quite right. So as things are becoming less illuminated on the overhead panel, that is a good thing. That's what we want. I'm going to turn on the anti-collision lights here, as well as the seat belts to prepare the cabin for. There are various options that PMDG provides for boarding the aircraft. They're all located in the FMC. That's not really the scope of this video, so we're not going to go through those procedures directly. that is going to be outside. If you guys would like to see a video on that, please let me know in the comments, and I'm more than happy to do that. We're going to turn on the packs and put the isolation valve setting here. And now we are ready to program the flight plan. So we're going to, you see the displays have come up, but the IRS hasn't aligned yet, so you will not have a lot of information here. So we are going to go into FMC, and let's take all of the mystery out of how to get this up and running fairly quickly. Position initial, so that's the initialized position. That's where you are right now. That lets the aircraft know exactly where it is. So you're at KSFO, which is San Francisco International, and you can plug that in here. It knows the generic coordinates of that airport, but the more precise coordinates you can use are located on page 2, which you're going to get to by the next page button here. And this GPS number here, click on that. That's going to copy into the scratch pad and insert that into this part here. As you see, it's a little bit different than the generic number that you get with the KSFO. So the route is the next screen. The FMS is going to logically walk you through all of the screens that are required to configure the aircraft. The origin is going to be KSFO, as we have said before. And the destination is going to be Chicago O'Hare International Airport, which is KORD. So we are entering that here. Flight number is going to be anything you'd like it to be. For this purpose, it's going to be 666 today, because why not? Runway information you can enter in here, but I prefer to do it in a different place. If you hit this departure arrival button, you're going to have departures on the left and arrivals on the right, and then the airports that are involved in your flight plan are going to be listed here in the center. So to select the departure, we're going to use the departure of KSFO right here, and we have been assigned runway 28R for departure. It's not listed here because it's on the next page, so hit next. We're going to have 28R, which you're going to select here, and the SID departure, which you're going to be using, is night 3, which is here, through a transition of MOGI, which is down here. So that's that. That's the departure procedure we're going to be utilizing. When you hit route, you can activate it now. You can keep activating things as you're entering the flight plan. Doesn't really matter. In any case, you can go back on the route here, and if you hit next page, on the second page you will see that first entry. You're going to get to MOGI via the Night 3 SID. The next thing that SimBrief calls is to enter airway Q122. Airways usually have letters and numbers in them, so when you see that, that means airway. So Q122, because it's an airway, it's going to go on the left side. The best way to understand what airways are, think of them like expressways that have exits. So you're going to have waypoints. There are going to be specific waypoints along that airway that you are able to exit at, from which point you can get onto either another airway or directly to a different waypoint. So from Q122, we're going to go to FOD, which is one of the waypoints on the airway, and here it is. And from FOD, we're not going to use an airway, we're going to go directly to Myers. When you have direct 2 points, which are annotated in SimBrief as DCT, you're going to enter Myers on the right-hand side, not enter anything on the left. It's going to auto-populate direct. You'll see how that happens. So Myers, it's spelled this way. It's going to go into the right column. As you see, it auto-populated direct, which is what we want. And that's really the entire route to Chicago. That's it. It's basically that airway, and it gets us to Myers. We can execute that. Now it knows this. Now we're going to handle arrival. Arrival into KORD, which is going to be right here, KORD, and arrival is on the right-hand side, is going to be to runway 28R, which is going to be on this third page here. It's an ILS approach, 28R, and the star you're going to be flying is the Fit 7 through Myers transition. So there you have it, execute. We now have the entire flight plan programmed. The way I like to verify everything, make sure that everything makes sense and connects and see all the restrictions, is by the legs button here. This will show you step by step exactly what's going to happen. The first thing that you need to take notice is that your initial heading, which is going to be runway 28, that's your departure runway, is going to be 284. So into the autopilot, you want to program the initial heading of 284. That is our runway heading. That is generally what you're going to fly initially. So all of your restrictions are going to be here. So at Rebus, you need to be above 8,000 feet. You see that. That will happen if you have your autopilot in VNAV mode. That's a little bit outside of the scope of this, but we're just going to finish going through this flight plan here. Everything makes sense. It just goes from one to another. This is great. Everything is connecting. You have a restriction here. This looks good. Okay, so you see this vector point. Prepared is generally good at vectoring you. Microsoft Flight Simulator is not. For that purpose, we're going to get rid of this vector segment, and the next waypoint is Atom here. So we're going to highlight Atom, and we're going to go back one page. Where it says vector, we're going to populate this atom into where vector is. That is essentially going to get rid of vector, and it's going to connect Tony directly to atom. Execute, and here we go. Now we have a direct connection between those 2 points without the need to be vectored. IRS has aligned, and now our display has our flight plan and our departure illustrated on here, which is great. You can see the situation of the runway itself. We're going to be departing 28R. That's your heading. We're going to take off, then make a right here to Galoo, and then turn left and go to Night. That's our departure, and this all happens within about a 10 nautical mile range. The other thing that we're going to note here from the legs point is the altitude of runway 28R in Chicago is located at 730 feet above sea level. The closest round number to that is 750, so in the landing altitude we're going to enter 750 so that auto cabin pressurization works correctly. I'm also going to, since it's starting to get dark here in the afternoon, I'm going to light things up a little bit and make things a bit easier to see. Some lighting on the overhead panel, and also some lighting on the console here in the center. There we go. So here we have the entire the entire flight plan programmed, and this is ready to go. The next thing we're going to do is you can just go back to route, which is where you were. The next thing it wants to go to is performance initialization, which you hit that. First thing you want to populate is ZFW. That ZFW is the same one that we entered before the aircraft was powered up. PMDG is nice, and they programmed it so that it will get auto-populated if you just click this field. So it's the first click is going to get you this number down here. Second click is going to populate it, and here the rest of these fields are going to be filled out automatically. We're going to consider reserve fuel at 2.0 for today's flight. Cost index is a basically fuel economy metric. I'm not going to explain that in detail now. That's outside the scope of this video, but PMDG's default cost index for the 737-700 is 18, from what I remember. So that's the cost index that we're going to utilize for this flight is 18. And we're going to be cruising at 37,000 feet, which is flight 370. That is provided by SimBrief. We're going to populate that into here. We can hit execute, and this is good to go. It's going to tell us that you're unable to do 280 knots at this waypoint, which is on descent. That's okay. There are other ways to get there. We're going to handle that later. Again, outside the scope of this video, we're just going to clear this message now. The N1 limit is the next page you want to attack, and this is engine derate, which helps you get a little bit more life out of your engine and save on fuel and save on noise and things like that. You are going to enter a select temperature, which is going to be equivalent to what another term that Airbus uses on their jets, but in Boeing's it's select temperature. It's flex in Airbus. So select a couple of things. I'm going to pull up from Active Sky here, which is the current weather report at the departure station. My weather is temperatures 18 degrees, which is the same thing that it reads here, but I just want to double check. So I'm going to use a select temperature of 38 degrees. It's not really going to derate engines much, otherwise it would move to climb 1 or climb 2, take off 1 or 2 for derate, but that's fine. So the next thing is we're going to go to the takeoff page, and before I enter any of this stuff in the V speeds on page 1, I immediately go to page 2 and enter my wind. So wind at this airport right now is 313, which is what we're going to do, 300-13. From 300 degrees at 13 knots is exactly what this means. The runway slope is 0 in this case. This is where you could enter runway slope. That changes your speeds and such. So we're going to go back to page 1. We're going to use, okay, we can close the Active Sky window here. Flaps, we're going to use flaps 10 for takeoff today. And for CG, if you just click this field, it is automatically going to populate it for you, the same way it did for ZFW. It's 24.3. Trim 5.49, so this is automatically a good time to trim the aircraft to 5.49 or something close to it. It doesn't need to be exact, but something around that neighborhood. You can see the values changing here. Ooh, that's a little too far. Let's 548 is great. So that's what we're going to roll with. And for V speeds, we're going to confirm 124, 128 is VR rotation, and V2 is 133. We're going to take this 133 speed, which is V2, and we're going to plug that into here. 133, that's right. Okay, just wanted to double check. So 133 is here. This is good, and that's really all we need. So now it's time to start the EPU and get this aircraft on its way. We're going to go to the lower overhead panel again. A couple of things we want to enable here. We want to turn on all of the electrical systems, so that goes down, and all of the fuel pumps go on as well. That should extinguish all of these low pressure annunciators here. These displays that show voltage, I like to put on TR1 and APU Gen. APU Gen is very useful because it shows me when APU is live. and is ready to power the aircraft instead of the ground power that we're using. So in order to start the APU, we're just going to move this down to on and then to start. You're going to see the exhaust gas temperature EGT gauge rising. You're going to have a little low pressure annunciator. There you go, low oil pressure. It's going to get extinguished in a minute as the APU comes alive. And once this gauge starts going down and stabilized, you're going to see a reading, a voltage reading here. If this is set to APU Gen, that's going to signify that your APU is live and ready to power the aircraft, at which point we're going to switch the electrical bus to be powering the aircraft from the APU instead of the ground power. At which point we can disconnect ground power, as well as, here we go, APU is live. These two central switches basically switch our aircraft to APU power now. That enables us to switch on the yaw damper. And one more thing that I'm going to set here is our cruise altitude of 37,000 feet. Make sure to not forget that, because that is your automated pressurization for your cabin, for your passengers. Otherwise, above 10,000 feet, you're going to start losing consciousness. You will have serious problems if you don't set these correctly. If you change your view to the cockpit now, I can actually go ahead and disconnect the ground power. I'm going to set parking brake and go to the menu, FS Actions, Ground Services, disconnect, release the ground power, and remove the chocks. Since our APU is now live, and we don't need ground power, everything is gone, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and do pushback before we start the engine. And once the tug connects, I plan to the parking brake gets released. Here's a beautiful aircraft, which I can't say for this default airport building. Alright, this is pretty good. We'll be finished with the pushback, put on the parking brake, and now we're ready to start engines. So before we start engines, we need to turn off the packs, which is down here. I'm going to put both of them in the off position. I'm going to set this to both, and we're ready to start engine number 2 to ground. Now our job is to monitor the N2 gauge right here. It's growing in percentage. It's at 10%. Once it hits 20%, we're going to introduce fuel via this lever here, 20%. And now we're watching how N1 builds and EGT of engine number 2 grows. While we're doing this, we can set our auto brake to RTO, that's rejected takeoff. In case we have to abort takeoff, your auto brakes are going to come on. Engine number 2 is live. We're going to put it on continuous ignition. One switch to the right. Now we're ready to start engine number 1. Put that on ground. So our elevator trim is completed. We've done that. Our auto brakes are where they need to be. We have 20% and 2. We're introducing fuel to engine number 1. We're going to need to put flaps in position 10, which is going to be 4 positions down. So this is flaps 1, 2, 5, 10. Since our APU is active, we do have hydraulics, so we're able to do this. You will see the indicator, the flaps indicator, moving towards 10 here, and that's now pretty much set. We can set the FMC to the legs page, continuous ignition for engine number 1. We're going to turn on our taxi lights and runway turnoff lights. And now we are ready to taxi. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to switch the power to the generator's bus, because our engines are now able to generate enough electricity to power the aircraft, and the APU is no longer needed. So I'm going to show you exactly how that's done. Overhead lower panel, we're going to flip these 2 outer switches down. The APU, you will see, will get illuminated into blue, which means it's no longer being powered by APU. We're going to turn on our packs. Can't forget to do that, otherwise your cabin pressurization is going to be a problem. So now we're going to flip the APU bleed off, because we no longer need that. The dual feed, dual bleed gets extinguished here. And now we're able to power off the APU, which is signified by these readings here, going back to 0. We are now ready to taxi. The only thing left to do is to configure our autopilot. I'm going to go ahead and turn on both of the flight directors, as well as arm the auto throttle. Let's assume the first altitude to which we are cleared is I had my throttle in a position that was not idle, so auto throttle didn't want to be armed, and now it's armed. And now we are ready to go. Depending on the airline's policy, VNAV and LNAV will be enabled in air. Sometimes VNAV gets enabled on the ground, which I do that. And we are ready to taxi. But this is where this video ends. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, and if you're looking for more content, various tutorials, product reviews, please be sure to subscribe to this page. Give me some comments, give me some feedback on what you like, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I appreciate the attention to this video, and hopefully this was some good information for you. Take care, and I'll see you around. Cheers.